Hello, everybody, and good evening. My name is Joshua Void, and I'm your host. And today, we're going to have a really good conversation based on faith and its problems. But before we do that, I really want to thank our Patreon supporters, Linear, Leon Deshay, and one second. Oh, I messed up on something. My apologies, everybody. One second. And Calasia for really helping us and supporting us with our endeavor to want to spread atheism, secularism, and literally positivism out there. So, again, thank you so much for helping us do what we do and what we love to do. So, without further ado, let us jump into the conversation at hand. So, what is faith? There's many definitions when we look at faith, but predominantly when we look at the believer in and of themselves, when we talk about faith, we're talking about predominantly a belief without evidence. We're talking predominantly a bridge, which in and of itself is supposed to compensate for reason, right? So when we look at reason brings us halfway, or the believer halfway across the bridge. But the problem is that there's insufficient evidence for that particular thing. Whatever that thing may be, it can be a spiritual thing, it can be literally a religious thing, it can be based on God, it can be on so many other prospects. So what ends up happening is that the believer in whatever that thing may be needs to utilize faith in order to cross that bridge, to literally construct that bridge from scratch, right? So when we see this, we run into a particular problem. And what is that one problem that we run into? Well, that one problem in and of itself is that we are looking at the that reason in and of itself isn't necessary, right? To the believer, reason isn't necessary. And henceforth, it is mixed with faith. And when we see these two things combined, we slowly but surely start to see that there is an issue here. And this particular issue is problematic. Because I've heard a lot of times, even from atheists, say, well, I have faith that, I don't know, the sun is going to come up tomorrow, even though that's not how it works. But what they mean is that the sun is going to be present in our sky tomorrow, or something along those lines. But the one thing is that we utilize the scientific model in order for us to understand the solar patterns, and let alone with the rotation of our planet, of our planetary body, which is Earth. What we slowly but surely see is that it is inevitable that the sun will be in our skies tomorrow, because throughout all of history, that is exactly what the tendency is. So yes, a lot of people may argue with me and say, well, that's based on experience. So how in the hell could you say that experience, like an experience, can change in due time? However, I have an argument based on that. That experience is also based on evidence that the sun is particularly in that area, right? And for the sun being in that area, and for the earth rotating the way that it does, constantly on a consistent basis, the sun will be in our skies tomorrow. Now, the question then lies. So, if we're looking at a belief without evidence, it is to take an irrational leap over more naturalistic probabilities and more naturalistic explanations on circumstances that we run into, right? So a lot of times, what ends up being the problem, what ends up being the very thing that leads us towards faith, is that there's this. area within knowledge, right? That is like, but we don't know. And that's a lot of that's the problem that breeds faith, is that idea that we don't know. But the thing is that when you speak to individuals that do understand what is happening, slowly but surely you see that faith is not used because they understand the model in which they are using. And through utilizing that said model, what ends up being the case is that we see that there's no need for faith for events which are known, right? And just like with people in general, when people say, well, I hope that my partner um isn't cheating on me, I hope that a situation isn't happening, or I hope that I pass that test, right? The reality of of the situation, right, is that in and of itself, the contemplation of hope is not the same exact thing as the contemplation of faith, right? Because when we hear faith in and of itself, what is the main thing that we hear when people say faith? It is a knowledge based claim. Because if you look at the Bible, right, and you see or you hear outlandish claims within any sort of holy scripture, biblical sources, uh, freaking ghosts and so on and so forth, right? What is the very first thing that comes to mind? People have this way of stating, I have faith that Jesus walked on water. I have faith that Jesus raised the dead, right? They're not saying that I'm hoping that Jesus raised the dead, or raise the dead to the living, or that I hope that Jesus did walk on water. They are claiming without the evidence that Jesus did do these things. These are actual knowledge claims, right? That faith is trying to claim without the evidence. Now, when we utilize the word hope, hope is not a knowledge claim. Hope in and of itself is kind of disambiguous from faith, even though that when we look at the dictionary examples of faith and hope, they're kind of like intertwined together. But philosophically speaking, they are two varying, very different entities in and of themselves. And just like the example that I gave based on Jesus walking on water, and that the believer has faith in that, or a believer having faith that Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, split the moon in two, right? Now, when we really look at that, that is definitely a faith based knowledge claim, because they're not saying, well, I hope that Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, did split the moon in two. I'm hoping that that happened. That is not at all the case. What they're saying is that we know that this happened, even though that the evidence isn't there to support it, right? So that's the two things that I think that must be differentiated between hoping and having faith. And I wanted to go over that just so that we can make it a little clearer in order to understand what we actually mean when we talk about hope, faith, and so on and so forth. Now, if that in and of itself is how the faithful come to their knowledge claims, then we can slowly but surely start to see, right? Sorry about the shaking of the screen there. So already when we are looking at these particular claims, and when we say that somebody is confident, when we say that somebody trusts, when we say that there's a promise or something like that, these are also things just like hope, right? That these things aren't knowledge claims either. These things are very, what's the word that I'm looking for here? These things are predominantly, uh how can I say it? Like the person doesn't need knowledge in order to hope for something, but a person does need faith in order to make that leap, in order to make those claims. And I hope that the idea that I utilized beforehand really did help at least define the two and everything like that. Define the different categories in a sense of a non-knowledge claim and a knowledge claim without reason or evidence to support it, right? Now, when we are looking at a particular thing, right? When we're looking at one second. Thank you, Linear. Oh, hold on. Hope, let me put this up. Hope is I like this to be true. Faith is I believe this to be true without evidence. You are absolutely right. And likewise, thank you, Linear, for telling me that that helped for the distinction. Because that's the number one thing, right? When people are saying that they hope, they're kind of already claiming that there's a possibility that this might not actually work, or this might not actually come to fruition, but they're hoping, or they're putting trust in a particular person, even though that person might, quote unquote, backstab them or whatever the situation is. They're putting their trust into that person because, and I would actually say there's a bit of knowledge in there because of your interaction with the person, right? Like, you don't just constantly believe whatever a person says. Like, you need to have that consistency with that individual, that then, or at least have some sort of um knowledge that that person, even if, let's just say, they did lie in the past, that they're working harder in order to change that, right? And from that very essence, then you can have much more trust in that person because you can see that there's a change that is happening, right? Now, the problem that I do have and that I do see with faith in and of itself, and I think this is really something that is interesting, at least when it comes to faith, is that when you are looking at like the faithful in and of themselves and how they interact with each other, right? And how they interact with the immediate family, there's so much or there are problems that come with this, right? So, for instance, faith and homosexuality, for instance, these two things are very divergent when we look at least the belief systems of the Abrahamic God, for instance. Homosexuality is a sin, and anybody who does that, even with the faithful who are actual, what people like to call fundamentalists, but what that means is that they are putting their full faith within the Bible or within the Quran or within the Torah in and of itself, right? And through that very essence, through that very being, what ends up happening, which is very interesting, is that, or is not interesting, is sad, actually. I shouldn't say interesting, is extremely sad, is that the way that the faithful interact with those individuals who might be their children who are gay or homosexuals and even lesbians or whatever, it comes down extremely hard. And a lot of times these parents who are faithful will send their children to Jesus camps or whatever in order to, quote unquote, pray the gay away, or to help what they believe is de-indoctrinate their children, or even towards a certain extent to get rid of Satan's sins from the child themselves, right? And a lot of times when you hear about these Jesus camps and everything like that, the most unheard of and the most horrific things tend to happen, right? But that's the one thing, is that along with faith, and if one's faith is strong enough, one's also adherence to their belief systems, to their superstitions, grows even stronger, right? And from there, and from that strength, oh, one second, let me just or they try to claim the word in the Bible translated as faith is the word pistis, which would be this is convincing. What you're being convinced of doesn't have to be based on evidence. Very true, very true. So, in Mage Grey Wolf, you're absolutely right. The problem, right, with the faithful in and of themselves is that the deeper they are within their faith, the more fundamentalist they become. The more fundamentalist they become, the more harsher they become on their children, the more harsher they become on the policy, on political policies, the more harsher they become in the interactions with other human beings. That there's not really anything wrong with or there's nothing wrong with individuals being homosexual, lesbian, bisexual, trans, whatever the situation may be, right? But to them, that is the most heinous sin, right? So the number one thing that they would want to do based on their faith is to try to either dissuade the individuals from being part of the LGBTQ plus community, or the other thing is that they would force their own children into the worst circumstances that they can be in order to try to uh, get them on the straight and narrow with Jesus, with God, with whichever Abraham. Well, there's only one Abrahamic God, but I mean, whichever that entity is, and whichever underneath the Abrahamic systems like Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, let alone you got Baha'ism and so on and so forth. But I digress. The major issue is that faith that is strong leads to the loss of freedoms for individuals, right? Because the more freedoms that those individuals have, or at least the more free society is towards how people can associate themselves, that is a hindrance to the faithful. And from there, they will battle against that. But again, as I stated, it matters how much faith they have within that particular book. I've seen Christians, Muslims, and Jewish individuals that did have the belief, right? But the faith wasn't strong. They had predominantly more evidence that they would like to use rather than the using of faith, which is very interesting in and of itself. But so when we really look at this aspect, when we really look at how the faithful utilize their faith, there is many intricacies within the variations of faith that they use, right? Because faith in and of itself is like a scale, and through that scale, it matters how much faith you have within that particular ideology or within that particular doctrine, which then solidifies you more within the doctrine itself, and let alone what that doctrine prohibits, right? So if the doctrine prohibits things and you have more faith than there is reason or rationality, then automatically what your faith prohibits will now be the thing that you will be 100% against. And sometimes the faith in and of itself can lead to hatred, right? And hatred of a particular people or of a particular, as I stated, homosexuals, lesbians, transsexuals, and the list goes on, right? And let alone another thing that faith could also build up within people is violence. And if you really look at how certain faithful individuals, like what we would like to claim as terrorists or extremists or fundamentalists or whatever the situation may be, these individuals have extreme faith within their ideology, right? And that's the thing that a lot of people don't necessarily understand about the extremists. They think that the extremist is taking the words of their particular holy scripture and, in a sense, just running amok and completely ruining that particular belief system or that particular ideology. The reality is that they are sometimes the most adherent individuals to the ideology, right? The extremists and the fundamentalists follow the biblical literature, follow the Quranic literature or scripture, or surah, my bad, surah, and biblical scriptures in a particular way that makes more sense, right, than somebody who's of a more liberal faith, for instance, where the reason overtakes faith. So there's a bit of faith that's in there, obviously, in order to believe in the God, in order to believe in certain claims within biblical, Quranic, or Toric. I forget what it's called actually. Scriptures, but at the end of the day, they predominantly act with reason. And through acting with reason, what ends up happening is that they are more liberal within their thought process, and they're more, let's just say, accepting of other individuals and everything like that, and accepting that those individuals in and of themselves can do their own thing. And it doesn't matter what a person does within their room, because that is their own thing. Obviously, if it's not harming or hurting anybody or hurting innocent children or children in general, obviously, and so on and so forth, then it's kind of like whatever you do inside your room, you do, you know, you're fine with doing it. Where with the more, let's just say, fundamentalists, whatever you do inside your room is a complete and utter sinful act towards a certain extent, right? And that must be either silenced or sometimes even eliminated, right? And gotten out of the way so that they themselves can reach that extent of heaven and everything, or at least that they'll preach against those particular individuals in general because they have more strong a faith than they do in reason. 1 second. They will also claim they have evidence and cite some subjective experience. This is an equivocation, as subjective evidence is not the same as what we usually mean when we say evidence. You are absolutely correct, because there needs to be a sense of repeatability. There needs to be repeatability in it. There needs to be actual observation, not just from one source, but from multiple sources, from multiple individuals focusing on this particular thing in this particular area and seeing some kind of result from there. So you're absolutely correct, Mage Gray Fox. Wolf, my bad. What the hell am I thinking? Mage Gray Wolf. So that's the thing, is just that when we really delve into these type of thought processes, what we end up seeing is that faith, if taken to such an extent or even to half the extent, so let's just say if a believer or whatever, and it doesn't even need to be just a believer within the Abrahamic belief systems, it can be in any type of ideological groupings, right, where they themselves right, take a drink, exactly. I definitely need that. So what ends up happening is that if we see that the bridge in and of, oh, hold on before I continue, what's going on, Linear? Just if anything, just write whatever you need, and then after I'll tackle that, but I'll just continue to discuss the particular subject matter. So what ends up happening is that if the faith is even the same exact extent as the reason, let's just say 50% reason, 50% faith, predominantly what you're going to see is an individual that is extremely, how could I say it, that will predominantly be following the book in their religious scripture or whatever the circumstance may be, And at the same exact time, they'll be focusing on reason in order to try to build up that argumentation and stuff based on their subjective experience, just like Mage Grey Wolf stated. But the problem is that in the end of the day, the faith will be strong enough in order to have irrational their epistemology would be more irrational than a believer that has predominantly way more faith way more evidence and way more reason behind their engagements and stuff like that and within their ideology than the faith itself. So again, just like how I stated, it's extremely I am not okay. Okay, yeah, I kind of am a lightweight. I'm not gonna argue that. But all in all, what we actually have a tendency of seeing is this type of interaction play out between reason and faith. And a lot of times there's this midlife crisis that ends up happening within any type of ideological belief system, and that is what takes precedence, right? The reason, the rationality, or the faith within this particular ideology. And from there, there's a battle that constantly happens, and it kind of fluctuates throughout the person's life. But when that midlife crisis happens, what ends up occurring is that the push may lead to more rationality and henceforth more questioning of biblical or more questioning of religious sources, and from there might even lead to agnosticism and or atheism in a sense. Or if the faith beats back the reason, what ends up happening is that we start seeing more fundamentalist thought process, and let alone we start seeing more of a disdain for individuals that don't follow biblical Quranic or Toranic. It's not, that's not even the word, but don't follow the Torah uh, properly in a sense. So that's what we actually see is this fluctuation. And that's one of the main problems that I see with faith is that faith does take people to extreme lengths, which are detrimental to the existence of uh, major groups and populations in and of themselves, you know? So that's the main issue, or one of the main issues that I have with faith in and of itself. Now, the other aspect that I see, so when a person also evokes faith in and of itself, what ends up happening is that the reason dissipates, right? And one reason dissipates, more outlandish thought processes occur. And let alone, one thing that I do find, and there's evidence for this, though I wish I did get that, is that individuals that have more faith have a tendency to believe a lot more in conspiracy theories, right? And a lot more into the outlandish thought processes that come with conspiracy theories in and of themselves. And what we need to actually show, and definitely as atheists and as secularists and everything like that, what we need to show when we look at faith in and of itself is there a reason that we should listen to the faithful in and of themselves? Because a lot of times we hear that, well, the faithful, because there's so many, with this group of individuals, why then should we question, right? What is the point of questioning? Because there's so many more Christians or Muslims or whatever. So in that case, religion needs to be right because it has more of a adherence than atheist and secular thought in and of itself. If we're looking at it worldwide as a worldwide event. And that's a lot of times too what we are kind of, or what is levied on us in particular, is the idea that we as atheists or as secularists or whatever also have faith, right? But that is something that when we really look at it, we like, I would say that atheists do have hopes. Atheists do put trust in things because obviously, just like with most of us, we like to read, we like to understand what is within chemistry, biology, physics, all the rest of that, even though that we might not be within the subject. But the thing is that we put our trust within the individuals who are delving into this scientific endeavor, right? So that we, when we look at it in and of itself, we can then start to see that, oh, okay, we are being led in the right direction, right? Because, and that's the number one thing too, because I think that the lack of faith actually creates an, or not an aura, but a more of a, God, what, my brain is not braining today. Jesus. It creates more of a environment to create well-being, right? And look at the well-being of others and everything like that, and helping others, not because we want to be rewarded or because we are faithful within some sort of reward, but because we want to help those type of, and we want to help individuals through our own necessity, whatever that may be, whatever may inspire us to do these acts do this act of generosity in order to rise the well-being of our particular communities, and let alone other communities as well. And I think that that in and of itself is constructed by the lack of faith, because through the lack of faith, now we look at human beings not as individuals who are quote unquote um, sinners in a sense. We're not looking at human beings as individuals that are at fault of doing some heinous crime towards a god or whatever the situation may be. But now we're looking at human beings based on their merit, based on how they present themselves to us, how they interact with us, and let alone we understand that the best way in order to move forward is not to leave individuals behind, but to rise the well-being of individuals to a higher standard, right? And I think that that in and of itself is something that I find secularists and atheists and even agnostics put forward more than faith-based, at least Christians, Muslims, and Jewish individuals as well. So all in all, what we see and what we have evidence, or a certain amount of evidence for, is that with faith there comes more hostility, right? More hostility towards those who are um, not defaming, but that are destroying, let's just say, or confronting biblical hypocrisies, and let alone, or religious hypocrisies, I should say, and let alone um, religious norms in and of themselves, because of either the patriarchal system that they utilize or whatever other instances, or the hatred towards certain groups that the faithful may have, you know. Whereas, as I stated, with atheists, secularists, and agnostics, we have more of an understanding that that individual is a person, and through being a person, should have a certain amount of respect levied onto them. And then once we meet those individuals, and once we're interacting with those individuals, then that respect then rises into wanting to help these individuals out or whatever the situation may be. So at the end of the day, I think in general, faith based systems are systems that bring forth persecution to individuals and persecution to uh, groups that are kind of like out of what that faith is adhering to. And non faith based communities are more looking at the person for what they bring to the actual table or to the proverbial table, let's just say, and how they interact with the community in and of itself. And if they are a conductive and conducive member of society and the community, then we wish to rise them up as well as best as we possibly can, and other communities as well, as I keep saying. So at the end of the day, I think that is something which differentiates the two. Now, the other thing that I find that reason, or not reason, but that faith in and of itself and the belief in faith runs contrary to, for instance, is that a person who has faith or believes by faith, for instance, simply has no ground to tell those who are non faithful, those who are atheistic or whatever the situation may be, or secularist or agnostic, that they ought to be faithful, right? Or that they are wrong for not being faithful, because that's the one thing. Within our community, we are using reason and rationality in order to look at particular claims. And through those particular claims, which are levied onto us, we look at it through a logical and rational lens. And through there, we make our decision based on, well, out of everything that we know thus far, does this make sense with the circumstances which we are dealing with and with our experiences, and let alone what the scientific method and the scientific community and even the philosophical community are stating at this very moment. And slowly but surely, through all this conglomeration or all this information that we have and all this information that we have received through reading, through our interactions, through our conversations, and through our experiences, what ends up happening is that we see that difference, and we see that, okay, your claim that whatever whoever may levy that claim on us or invoke that claim towards us, we start to see that this isn't there's no rational reason to believe in it. And henceforth, that's where I kind of come into. If it doesn't have any rational claim, then you can reject it completely, because there's no reason to even contemplate it, in my opinion. If there's so many contradictions that are within that said faith-based ideology, then what is the point in believing in that faith-based ideology in the first place? And not only that, because I don't want to delve into lack theism, for instance, because I think that has its issues and problems. I think in general, what we should be looking at is the rejection of those claims. And just like how a lot of individuals reject, for instance, magic, reject uh, freaking ancient demons and gods of the old, or not old, I was about to say Old Testament, but gods of ancient times and everything like that. It's not that we contemplate these gods as being like, oh, wow, maybe they might have some sort of rational reason to believe in these gods. We reject in the claim because there's no rational reason why we should believe in the claim in the first place. And henceforth, I think it's the same exact thing when we interact with the monotheistic deities. we must reject the claim. It makes no sense, and henceforth we reject it. We don't, and I think for us stating that, oh, well, maybe there might be something that we haven't heard yet or whatever, I think that in and of itself leads individuals to a little bit lead us to confusion, right? Because we're kind of like wanting to believe in something towards a certain extent, right? Because we want to believe in things that are truthful. But the one thing is that in order for us to look at the God equation in and of itself, we need to understand that if the equation doesn't make sense, and if the methodology that is being used in order to think about this or this deity, this being, the faith that is utilized within this ends up being contradictory or whatever the situation may be, then we can slowly but surely, through rationality and through evidence, just say, I reject your claim. And there's no, and I think that is the best way of really delving into it. But all in all, I think that we have delved into the faith, or at least the beginnings of faith, because I do want to come to this uh, question again based on faith and really come in here with an individual who has faith and have that conversation with that individual, really delve into it. So this is going to be a multi-series type thing moving forward based on faith, and an atheist talking with a theist and really delving into why they believe and what they believe. But all in all, I just want to say thank you all for coming and watching the show. And if you really like the show, please hit that like and subscribe button, and also hit the notification bell too, because when we do come out with the show, you will be notified immediately. The other thing too is that we have a Discord, so check the link below in order to check out our Discord and join our awesome community. I'm trying to actually, or now I'm going to try to really work and ramp up the the Discord in a way that is definitely going to build it into a community that we can be proud of. And also, we have a Patreon. So check down below in the description below, and you'll see our Patreon there. So again, I want to thank Linear, Dion LaShay, and Calasia for really helping us do what we love doing, and that is providing information and providing awesome videos for you, the viewer. Now, before I leave, I do, if anybody has questions, please ask any questions that you may have. Greg. I mean, yes, Greg is I would I want to try to get another theist in order to really delve in, but I do really like having conversations with Greg too. So I think that, yeah, Greg would be an individual that I will want to sit with and talk to him about faith in a sense. But I would definitely want to have other individuals to have that conversation as well. I thought this was really well organized. Thank you, Linear. I really did look up. Really wanted to focus on this a lot more than I have before, and I think that coming back, because I do find that I did miss a couple of things. We can talk about that later. But all in all, thank you all for joining. Thank you all for listening in. And come tomorrow, because we got one hell of a show coming through tomorrow, too. So, again, hit that like and subscribe button, hit that notification bell at the bottom, bow. And at the same exact time, we got a Discord and a Patreon link. So, if you want to join that and help grow our community and help us through engaging in our projects and projects in the future, then please hit that Patreon. Again, thank you so much, and I will see you tomorrow on the Atheist Uprising. See